The morning of June 4th, 2021, began like any other in Montecito, California, with the Pacific Ocean breeze carrying the scent of jasmine through the open windows of Harry and Meghan's home. But, by noon, everything would change. Meghan had been experiencing contractions since dawn, and Harry had been nervously checking his watch every few minutes, torn between excitement and the weight of what this day would mean for their family. Unlike the highly publicized birth of their son Archie at the Portland Hospital in London, this delivery would be completely private. No press gathered outside the hospital, no official announcements prepared by palace communications teams, no formal protocols to follow. For the first time in his life, Harry was about to become a father without the eyes of the world watching his every move. The Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital was a far cry from the private wings of London hospitals where royal babies were traditionally born. But for Harry and Meghan, it represented something more valuable than prestige or tradition. It offered them the chance to welcome their daughter in peace, surrounded only by the people they chose to have there. Dr. Sarah Chun, who had been caring for Meghan throughout her pregnancy, was a calm presence in the delivery room. She had delivered hundreds of babies, but she understood that this one carried particular significance. Not because of the parents' royal connections, but because of the careful thought that had gone into every aspect of this child's welcome into the world, starting with the name that would soon be announced to the world. At 11:40 a.m. Pacific Time, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor entered the world with a strong cry that immediately brought tears to her father's eyes. Harry had been present for Archie's birth, but this moment felt different, more peaceful, more intimate, more authentic to who he and Meghan had become as a couple and as parents. Meghan held her daughter for the first time with a mixture of exhaustion and pure joy. The little girl had Harry's reddish hair and what appeared to be Meghan's eyes, though newborn features were still too undefined to make definitive comparisons. What was immediately clear was that she was healthy, alert, and already showing signs of the strong personality that ran in both sides of her family. "Hello, Lilibet," Harry whispered, gently touching his daughter's tiny hand. Speaking her name aloud for the first time in her presence felt momentous. This wasn't just any baby. This was the little girl whose name had already begun to heal rifts in his family, whose very existence represented hope for reconciliation and new beginnings. The hours following Lilibet's birth were filled with the usual newborn activities, feeding, sleeping, and endless photos that would never be shared with the public, but would fill their personal albums for years to come. Harry found himself thinking about his father and brother, wondering what they were doing at that exact moment, hoping that when they learned about Lilibet's arrival, they would feel the same joy he was experiencing. The decision about when and how to announce the birth had been discussed extensively during Meghan's pregnancy. They wanted to maintain their privacy while also acknowledging that public interest in their family was inevitable. More importantly, they wanted to make sure that King Charles and Prince William heard the news directly from them before any public announcement was made. That evening, as Meghan rested in their hospital room with Lilibet sleeping peacefully in her arms, Harry made 2 phone calls that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his family's story. The time difference meant it was already late evening in London, but he knew these calls couldn't wait until morning. King Charles was in his study at Highgrove when his private phone rang. He had been thinking about Harry and Meghan more frequently as Meghan's due date approached, wondering if he would be among the first to know when his granddaughter arrived. When he saw Harry's number on the screen, his heart began to beat faster. "Papa." Harry's voice was filled with emotion even across the thousands of miles. "She's here. Lilibet Diana was born this morning, and she's perfect." The silence that followed wasn't empty, but full of everything Charles couldn't quite find words to express. His mother's nickname, spoken in the context of his newest granddaughter, brought back a flood of memories. Queen Elizabeth II had died less than a year earlier, and Charles still felt her absence acutely every day. But hearing that Harry and Meghan had given his granddaughter her great-grandmother's private name felt like a gift beyond anything he could have imagined. "Lilibet Diana," Charles repeated softly. "How is Meghan? How are you both?" Harry described the birth, sharing details about his daughter's first hours of life with a joy that Charles hadn't heard in his son's voice for years. They talked about Meghan's recovery, about how Archie was adjusting to becoming a big brother, about the perfect California weather that had welcomed Lilibet into the world. But underneath the surface conversation, both men were thinking about what this moment meant for their relationship and their family's future. "I want you to meet her, Papa," Harry said toward the end of their conversation. "When the time is right, when we can arrange it properly, I want you to hold your granddaughter and tell her about her great-grandmother." Charles felt tears he hadn't expected welling up in his eyes. "I would be honored, Harry, truly honored." The second call, to William, was more complicated. The brothers' relationship remained fragile despite the positive conversation they'd shared about Lilibet's name. Too much had happened between them for a single phone call to repair years of hurt and misunderstanding. But the birth of a niece felt like an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to focus on love rather than grievances. William was at home in Adelaide Cottage when Harry's call came through. Catherine and the children were already asleep, and he was working late on briefings for upcoming royal engagements. Like his father, William had been thinking about Harry and Meghan as the due date approached, wondering what role he might play in his niece's life given the current state of their relationship. "Will," Harry's voice was careful but warm, "I wanted you to know that your niece was born this morning. Lilibet Diana. She's healthy and beautiful, and Meghan is doing well." William closed the briefing papers he'd been reading. Royal duties could wait. This moment was about family, about the arrival of a new generation who might someday heal the wounds that had divided their own. "Congratulations, Harry. Really, I'm so happy for you both. How much did she weigh? Does she look like Archie?" The conversation that followed was easier than either brother had expected. They talked about the logistics of new parenthood, the way life changes completely when you hold your child for the first time, the hopes and dreams that immediately attach themselves to a new baby. For a few minutes, they sounded like the brothers they used to be before royal duties and personal differences had come between them. "Catherine will want to send something for the baby," William said. "And the children will be excited to know they have a new cousin. Charlotte especially has been asking about when she might have a baby cousin to play with." Harry felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced when talking to his brother in years. The idea that his daughter might someday play with William's children, that the next generation might grow up closer than their parents had been able to remain, felt like a possibility worth nurturing. "I'd like that," Harry said. "I'd like Lilibet to know her cousins, to understand that she's part of a bigger family even though we live so far away." The announcement to the world would come a few days later, carefully crafted to honor both the baby's privacy and the public's interest in the royal family. But these private phone calls, these first conversations about Lilibet's arrival, were the moments that truly mattered. They represented steps toward healing that couldn't be captured in press statements or official photographs. In the days following Lilibet's birth, congratulations poured in from around the world. Queen Elizabeth II, in one of her final official acts before her death, had sent a private message expressing her delight at having a great-granddaughter named in her honor. Prime ministers, heads of state, and celebrities all offered their best wishes to the new parents. But the messages that meant the most to Harry and Meghan came from family members who were beginning to reach out in ways they hadn't for years. Princess Anne, known for her direct communication style, sent a heartfelt note expressing her hope that distance wouldn't prevent Lilibet from knowing her royal heritage. Prince Edward and Sophie shared memories of Queen Elizabeth II's reaction to learning about great-grandchildren, painting a picture of a woman who had been genuinely excited about each new addition to the family. Even some of the extended royal cousins reached out, expressing their desire to maintain family connections despite geographical and personal challenges. Meghan spent her first days as a mother of two marveling at how different this experience was from Archie's birth. There was no pressure to appear in public within days of giving birth, no speculation about when she would return to royal duties, no criticism of her parenting choices from people who had never met her. Instead, she could simply focus on bonding with her daughter, helping Archie adjust to his new role as a big brother, and planning for a future where her children could grow up with the freedom to be themselves. Harry found himself taking hundreds of photos of Lilibet, many of which would never be shared publicly, but would fill their family albums for generations to come. He documented her first smiles, her first reactions to sunlight streaming through the windows, her peaceful sleep in Meghan's arms. These weren't images for press releases or official portraits, but personal memories of a time when their family of three became a family of four. The name Lilibet Diana continued to generate positive reactions as news of the birth spread. Royal historians noted the significance of honoring both Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana in a single name, recognizing it as a gesture that bridged different eras of royal history. The public, always fascinated by royal babies, embraced the connection between the newest arrival and beloved figures from the family's past. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. Veterans organizations, charities that had worked with Princess Diana, and Commonwealth leaders all expressed their appreciation for the way Harry and Meghan had chosen to honor the royal family's legacy. The name felt like a recognition that service and compassion transcended personal conflicts, that the best aspects of royal tradition could be carried forward even by family members who had chosen different paths. As June turned into July, and Lilibet grew from a newborn into a more alert infant, Harry began to envision moments in the future when his daughter would meet her grandfather and uncle. He imagined King Charles sharing stories about Queen Elizabeth II, helping Lilibet understand the remarkable woman whose name she carried. He pictured William teaching her about Princess Diana's humanitarian work, showing her how compassion could be a form of service to others. These weren't just dreams, but goals that Harry hoped to achieve through patience, understanding, and the gradual rebuilding of trust that had been damaged by years of conflict. Lilibet's birth had opened doors that had seemed permanently closed, creating opportunities for healing that hadn't existed before. Whether those opportunities would be fully realized remained to be seen. But, for the first time in years, Harry felt genuinely hopeful about his family's future. The little girl sleeping peacefully in her California nursery had no idea of the history she carried in her name or the hopes that rested on her tiny shoulders. But she had already accomplished something remarkable. She had reminded her family that love was stronger than disappointment, that new life could inspire fresh starts, and that sometimes the most powerful peace offerings came in packages weighing less than 7 pounds and measuring just 20 inches long. The weeks following the secret meeting at Windsor Castle brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere around the royal family. King Charles found himself thinking often about his conversation with Harry, particularly during quiet moments in his study at Clarence House. The room was filled with photographs spanning decades of royal history, but his eyes kept returning to a particular image of Queen Elizabeth II holding a young Harry during a family gathering at Balmoral. Charles picked up the silver-framed photograph, studying his mother's expression as she looked down at her grandson with unmistakable love. The Queen had always had a special relationship with Harry, perhaps because she saw something of herself in his rebellious spirit, or maybe because she understood the unique challenges faced by the spare in the royal hierarchy. She had lived through her own sister Margaret's struggles with duty versus desire, and Charles suspected she saw echoes of those conflicts in Harry's journey. The decision to name the new baby Lilibet felt like Harry was acknowledging that connection, honoring not just his grandmother's public service, but the private woman who had loved him unconditionally. Charles remembered countless conversations with his mother about Harry's future, her gentle guidance when his younger son struggled to find his place within the royal structure. She had always believed that Harry would find his way back to the family, even when that seemed impossible. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Prince William was having his own moments of reflection. Catherine had noticed the change in her husband since his return from Windsor Castle that evening. He had been quieter than usual during dinner with the children, but there was something different about his silence, less tense, more thoughtful. When the children were finally asleep, he had told her about Harry's visit and the name choice that had surprised them all. Catherine understood the complexity of her husband's emotions better than anyone. She had watched the relationship between the brothers deteriorate over the years, seen how much pain William carried beneath his composed public exterior. The loss of his close relationship with Harry had been one of the most difficult aspects of the changes their family had undergone. But hearing about the name Lilibet Diana had stirred something in William that Catherine recognized as hope. "He's trying to build bridges," Catherine had said that night as they prepared for bed. The name isn't just about honoring Granny and your mother. It's Harry's way of saying he still considers himself part of this family. William had nodded, but Catherine could see the caution in his eyes. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily rebuilt. There had been too many public statements, too many private conversations shared with the media, too many moments when William had felt betrayed by the brother he had once protected so fiercely. But the gesture of including both Lilibet and Diana in his daughter's name felt genuine in a way that previous attempts at reconciliation hadn't. The name Diana carried particular weight for William. His mother's memory was something he guarded carefully, sharing stories about her with his own children while trying to shield them from the more painful aspects of her life and death. When Harry had included Diana in his son Archie's middle name, it had felt appropriate, but not particularly significant. Adding it to his daughter's name, especially combined with their great-grandmother's private nickname, felt like something deeper, a recognition that their shared grief over Diana's loss could be a foundation for rebuilding rather than a source of continued pain. As the news of the meeting began to circulate quietly within palace circles, reactions were mixed but generally hopeful. Senior staff members who had worked with the family for decades understood the significance of Harry's gesture. These were people who had witnessed the private moments behind public appearances, who knew that the royal family's strength had always come from their ability to adapt and evolve while maintaining their core bonds. Lady Susan Hussey, one of Queen Elizabeth II's longest-serving ladies-in-waiting, was among the first to hear about the name choice through her continued connections within the household. She had known all 3 generations of men involved in that Windsor Castle conversation, had watched Harry grow from a mischievous child into a troubled young man, and, finally, into a father himself. The choice to honor Queen Elizabeth II's memory in such a personal way brought tears to her eyes. Her Majesty would have been deeply moved, Lady Susan confided to a close friend over tea in her London home. She worried about Harry, especially after he moved to America. She understood his need for independence, but she also hoped he would find his way back to the family eventually. This name choice, it suggests he never really left, not in his heart. The palace communications teams were already beginning to think about how the birth announcement would be handled when the time came. Unlike with previous royal births, there would be no formal photo call outside a hospital, no official press statement read from an easel. Harry and Meghan had chosen a different path for their family, one that prioritized privacy over protocol. But the significance of the name would not be lost on royal watchers or the general public. In California, Meghan was experiencing the final weeks of her pregnancy with a sense of peace she hadn't felt during her time as a working royal. The pressure of constant scrutiny had lifted, replaced by the simple joy of preparing to welcome their daughter. She spent hours in the nursery they had prepared, arranging books and toys while thinking about the conversations Harry had shared with her about his family's reaction to their name choice. Meghan understood the weight of royal names better than many people realized. Her years within the family had taught her about the careful consideration that went into such decisions, the way a single choice could honor history while making a statement about the future. When she had first suggested including Diana in their daughter's name, she had been thinking about the grandmother her children would never meet, the woman whose compassion and humanitarian work had inspired so many people around the world. The addition of Lilibet had been Harry's idea, but Meghan had embraced it immediately. She had met Queen Elizabeth II only a handful of times, but each encounter had revealed glimpses of the woman behind the crown, someone with a sharp wit, genuine curiosity, and deep love for her family. The Queen had been one of the few family members to reach out privately after Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties, expressing her hope that distance wouldn't diminish the bonds between them. As Meghan rested in the California sunshine, she thought about the story she would one day tell her daughter about her name. It wouldn't be a simple tale of honoring ancestors, but something more complex and meaningful. Lilibet Diana would grow up knowing that her name represented healing and hope, that it had been chosen not just to honor the past, but to build bridges toward a better future. The royal family's history was filled with names that carried deep significance, but few had been chosen with such conscious intention to mend relationships. Victoria had honored her godmother, Elizabeth had connected her to centuries of queens before her. But Lilibet Diana felt different, more personal, more deliberate, more hopeful. In the quiet moments before sleep each night, Harry found himself imagining the day he would introduce his daughter to his father and brother. He pictured King Charles holding his granddaughter for the first time, sharing stories about the great-grandmother whose name she carried. He imagined William teaching her about their mother Diana, passing on memories that would help her understand the woman whose compassion would hopefully inspire her own life. These weren't just dreams, but goals Harry was actively working toward. The conversation at Windsor Castle had been a first step, but rebuilding family relationships would require ongoing effort from everyone involved. There would need to be more conversations, more gestures of goodwill, more willingness to put family above pride and personal grievances. The irony wasn't lost on Harry that his daughter's name might accomplish what years of family meetings and public statements had failed to achieve. Sometimes the most powerful messages were delivered not through grand gestures, but through quiet, personal choices that spoke to the heart rather than the head. By choosing to honor both Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana, Harry and Meghan were making a statement about their values and their hopes for their daughter's future. The name also served as a reminder of the women who had shaped the royal family's modern history. Queen Elizabeth II had guided the monarchy through decades of change, maintaining its relevance while adapting to shifting social expectations. Princess Diana had shown the world what royal compassion could look like, using her position to draw attention to causes that truly mattered. Together, they represented different but complementary approaches to royal service, duty and empathy, tradition and innovation, public responsibility and personal authenticity. As the weeks passed and Meghan's due date approached, the anticipation within the royal family grew. King Charles found himself hoping that his granddaughter's birth might mark a new chapter for all of them, one where past hurts could be acknowledged but not allowed to define the future. William began thinking about how his own children might one day form relationships with their American cousins, how the next generation might heal wounds that had divided their parents. The name Lilibet Diana had already begun to work its quiet magic, reminding everyone involved that family bonds could survive even the deepest disappointments. Soon, there would be a little girl to embody that hope, to serve as a living reminder that love was stronger than pride, that healing was always possible, and that sometimes the most important conversations happen not in public, but in private rooms where 3 generations of men could simply be father and sons, brothers trying to find their way back to each other. The power of naming a child had been recognized throughout human history, but rarely had a single name carried such potential for transformation. Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor would enter the world carrying not just her parents' love and hopes, but the possibility of reuniting a family that had almost lost its way. In choosing her name so carefully, Harry and Meghan had given their daughter a gift that went far beyond royal heritage. They had given her the chance to be a bridge between past and future, tradition and change, family members who loved each other but had forgotten how to show it. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Prince Harry walked through corridors that held 1,000 childhood memories. His footsteps echoed on the ancient stone floors, each one taking him closer to a meeting he had been thinking about for weeks. In his jacket pocket, he carried a small piece of paper with handwriting that belonged to his wife Meghan, a name they had chosen together, a name that meant everything to them. It had been 18 months since Harry and Meghan had stepped back from their royal duties and moved to California. 18 months of headlines, interviews, and family tensions that seemed impossible to heal. But now, with Meghan expecting their second child, a daughter, Harry felt a pull he couldn't ignore. This wasn't about royal protocol or public relations. This was about family. This was about making sure his father and brother knew something important before the rest of the world did. The meeting had been arranged quietly through private secretaries. No press would know about it. No official records would be kept. Just 3 men, a father, and his 2 sons, sitting down to talk about something that mattered more than any royal duty or public appearance. King Charles was already waiting in the Oak Room when Harry arrived. The newly crowned monarch looked older than Harry remembered, the weight of his new responsibilities visible in the lines around his eyes. Charles had always been a man who carried the burden of tradition heavily, but becoming king had added layers of complexity that even his decades of preparation couldn't fully ease. When he saw his younger son enter the room, something shifted in his expression, a softness that rarely appeared in public. "Harry," Charles said simply, rising from his chair. There was so much packed into that single word: relief, love, uncertainty, hope. They hadn't spoken privately since the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and that brief conversation had been stilted and formal, surrounded by the eyes of the world and the weight of ceremony. Prince William arrived a few minutes later, still wearing the suit from an earlier engagement in London. The drive to Windsor had given him time to think about what this meeting might mean. Relations with his brother had been strained for years, reaching a breaking point after Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey. Words had been said that couldn't be taken back. Trust had been broken in ways that seemed impossible to repair. But William also knew that some things were bigger than hurt feelings and misunderstandings. The news that Harry wanted to share something about his unborn daughter had stirred something in William that he hadn't felt in years: curiosity mixed with genuine care for his brother's growing family. Despite everything that had happened between them, Harry was still his little brother, and this little girl would still be his niece. The three men sat in leather chairs that had been in the royal family for generations. Outside, the rain continued to fall, creating a peaceful backdrop to a conversation that would be anything but simple. Harry looked at his father and brother, two people who had shaped his life in countless ways, two people he had disappointed and been disappointed by, two people he still loved despite everything that had come between them. "I wanted you both to hear this from me before anyone else," Harry began, his voice steady but emotional. "Meghan and I have chosen a name for our daughter. We've spent months thinking about it, talking about it, and we wanted you to know what it means to us." Charles leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together. William remained still, but Harry could see the interest in his eyes. This wasn't about royal titles or official duties. This was about something personal, something that connected all three generations sitting in that room. Harry pulled the small piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it carefully. Meghan's handwriting was neat and clear, the letters forming a name that had made them both cry when they first spoke it aloud together. A name that honored the past while looking toward the future. A name that carried love, respect, and hope, all wrapped into 6 letters that would change everything. "Her name," Harry said, looking first at his father and then at his brother, "will be Lilibet. Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor." The silence that followed was profound, not empty, but full of emotion that none of the three men quite knew how to express. Lilibet had been Queen Elizabeth II's private family nickname, used only by those closest to her. It was what Prince Philip had called her throughout their marriage. It was what her father, King George VI, had called her when she was just a little girl who never expected to wear the crown. Charles felt his breath catch in his throat. His mother had been gone for over a year now, but the grief still came in waves when he least expected it. She had been the constant in his life, the woman who had guided him through decades of preparation for the role he now held. Hearing her pet name spoken aloud in this context brought back a flood of memories. Family Christmases at Sandringham, quiet moments at Balmoral, the last conversation they'd had before her death. William's reaction was more complex. He thought of his grandmother, of course, but he also thought of his mother. Diana had been gone for over 25 years, but her presence still filled every room whenever her name was mentioned. The combination of Lilibet and Diana felt like Harry was trying to honor both the grandmother who had raised them and the mother they had lost too young. "Lilibet Diana," Charles repeated softly, testing the words on his tongue. "She would have been so pleased, Harry. So very pleased." Harry nodded, feeling some of the tension he'd been carrying begin to ease. "We wanted to honor both of them. Granny because she meant everything to our family, and Mum because, well, because she should be here to meet her granddaughter, and since she can't be, we wanted her to be part of her name." William found himself thinking about his own children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. He remembered the careful consideration that had gone into each of their names, the way he and Catherine had weighed tradition against personal preference, the desire to honor family history while giving each child their own identity. He understood why Harry had chosen this name, even if part of him felt conflicted about it. The conversation that followed was unlike any the three men had shared in years. They talked about Queen Elizabeth II, not as the monarch, but as the grandmother and mother who had shaped their lives. They shared memories that the public had never heard, stories that revealed the woman behind the crown. Charles told them about phone calls he'd had with his mother during Harry's difficult years, how she had always believed that family love could overcome any obstacle. Harry talked about Meghan's pregnancy, how different this experience was from when they were expecting Archie. There was less pressure now, less scrutiny, more freedom to simply enjoy the anticipation of welcoming a daughter. He described how Meghan had been the one to suggest including Diana in their daughter's name, how she understood the importance of keeping his mother's memory alive for their children. William shared his own struggles with honoring Diana's memory while moving forward with his own family. He talked about how he tried to tell his children stories about the grandmother they would never meet, how he wanted them to understand her kindness and compassion without being overwhelmed by the tragedy of her death. As the evening wore on, the three men found themselves talking about more than just names. They discussed the challenges of raising children in the public eye, the difficulty of balancing personal desires with royal expectations, the weight of carrying on family traditions while still being authentic to themselves. These were conversations they should have been having for years, but pride and hurt feelings had gotten in the way. Charles found himself remembering his own childhood, the pressure he had felt to live up to expectations that sometimes seemed impossible to meet. He thought about the mistakes he had made as a father, the ways he had been too distant or too demanding. Looking at his two sons now, both grown men with families of their own, he felt a deep regret for the time they had lost to misunderstandings and stubbornness. Harry could see the effort his father and brother were making to connect with him again. It wasn't easy for any of them. Too much had happened. Too many words had been spoken in anger or frustration. But, sitting in that room, talking about his unborn daughter, Harry felt a glimmer of hope that maybe they could find their way back to being a family again. The rain had stopped by the time Harry prepared to leave. The three men stood together in the entrance hall of Windsor Castle, a space that had witnessed countless royal farewells over the centuries. This goodbye felt different from the ones that had come before, less formal, more genuine, touched with possibility. Charles hugged his younger son, something he hadn't done in far too long. "Give my love to Meghan," he said, "and tell her how grateful I am that she wanted to honor my mother this way." William's goodbye was more reserved, but Harry could see the effort he was making. "I'm happy for you," William said. "Really happy. Lilibet is a beautiful name." As Harry drove away from Windsor Castle, he felt lighter than he had in months. The conversation hadn't solved all their problems. There was still too much hurt and misunderstanding for that. But it had opened a door that had been closed for too long. It had reminded all three men that beneath the titles and duties and public expectations, they were still family. The name Lilibet Diana would soon become known around the world, but tonight it had served a different purpose. It had brought three generations of royal men together in a moment of genuine connection, reminding them that some things, family, love, the desire to honor those who came before, were more important than any disagreement or disappointment. In California, Meghan was waiting to hear how the conversation had gone. When Harry called her later that evening, she could hear the emotion in his voice as he described his father's reaction, his brother's careful but genuine response, the way all three of them had ended up sharing memories and stories like they used to when they were younger. The little girl growing inside Meghan didn't know it yet, but her name had already begun to heal wounds that had seemed too deep to mend. In choosing to honor both Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana, Harry and Meghan had done more than select a beautiful name for their daughter. They had offered an olive branch to a family that desperately needed to find its way back to love and understanding. As the weeks passed, word of the conversation would spread quietly through the inner circles of the royal family. Palace staff would notice a slight warming in the interactions between the brothers during official events. King Charles would mention his excitement about meeting his new granddaughter to close friends and advisors. The healing wouldn't happen overnight, and There would still be challenges ahead, but the foundation had been laid for reconciliation. The power of a name, especially one chosen with such care and love, had reminded three men that family bonds could survive even the deepest disappointments. In honoring the past, Harry had also opened the door to a different kind of future, one where love might finally triumph over pride, and where a little girl named Lilibet Diana could grow up knowing she was cherished by all the generations that came before her. Behind the golden gates of Windsor Castle, a conversation took place that would change everything. Three generations of royal men sat in the same room, discussing something more precious than any crown jewel, the name of an unborn princess who would capture hearts around the world. What Prince Harry revealed to his father King Charles and brother Prince William that autumn evening would become one of the most touching family moments in recent royal history. The weight of tradition pressed down on the room like the ancient stones of the castle itself. For centuries, royal names had been chosen with careful consideration of history, meaning, and legacy. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't just about honoring the past. It was about healing wounds, building bridges, and creating something beautiful from the ashes of family division. The name they discussed wasn't just letters on a birth certificate. It was a love letter to a grandmother who had touched millions of lives, a peace offering between brothers who had grown apart, and a promise that love could triumph over protocol. As Harry shared his and Meghan's choice, tears filled eyes that had seen too much pain and not enough joy in recent years. What happened in that room would remain secret for months. But when the world finally learned the truth, it would understand that sometimes the most powerful gestures come in the smallest packages. In this case, wrapped in a name that would make a kingdom weep with joy and remembrance.